Hello and welcome back. Tonight we turn our gaze to the golden age of aviation, a time of daring heroes and monumental risks. We follow the flight path of a global icon on her final, fateful journey, a journey that ended not in triumph, but in a question that has echoed for nearly a century. This is the story of the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. What happened on the final flight? To understand the depth of the mystery, one must first understand the brilliance of the star at its center. Amelia Earhart was more than just a pilot. She was a phenomenon. In an era when women were largely confined to domestic roles, Earhart shattered barriers with a disarming smile and an iron will. Her 1932 solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean, the first by a woman, catapulted her to global superstardom. With her tousled short hair, slender frame, and quiet charisma, she became a symbol of modern womanhood, independence, and the boundless potential of the human spirit. She was a fashion icon, an author, a lecturer, and a tireless advocate for women's rights. By 1937, she was arguably the most famous woman in the world, a living legend who had conquered the skies. But for a spirit like Earhart's, there was always another frontier, another first to achieve. Her final, greatest ambition was to be the first woman to circumnavigate the globe. This was her Everest, a grueling 47,000-kilometer journey, following a challenging equatorial route. For this monumental undertaking, she had the most advanced civilian aircraft of its day, a twin-engine Lockheed Electra 10E, which she called her flying laboratory. The plane was heavily modified, its fuselage filled with extra fuel tanks, reducing space for anything but the crew and their essential equipment. Her crew was a man as skilled in his field as she was in hers. Fred Noonan, a former Pan Am navigator who was considered one of the best celestial navigators in the world. His job was to guide them across the vast, featureless oceans, using only the sun, the stars, a sextant, and a chronometer. Their first attempt, flying west from Oakland, California in March 1937, ended in disaster before it truly began. During takeoff from Hawaii for the next leg, a ground loop caused the Electra to spin out of control, severely damaging the aircraft. The attempt was aborted. It was a costly and humiliating failure, but Earhart was undeterred. After extensive repairs, she was ready to try again, this time flying east. The second attempt began on June 1st, 1937, from Miami, Florida. For the next month, the world watched in awe as Earhart and Noonan ticked off milestone after milestone. They flew across South America, Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia. The journey was arduous and fraught with challenges, monsoon weather, illness, and mechanical issues. But they persevered. By the end of June, they had successfully completed over 35,000 kilometers of the journey. Empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. On July 2nd, 1937, Earhart and Noonan prepared for the most perilous leg of their entire journey. They were at a dusty, primitive airfield in Lae, New Guinea, readying the Electra for a 4,113-kilometer to Howland Island. Howland Island is a place that barely qualifies as land. It is a tiny, flat sliver of coral and sand in the middle of the Pacific, just 2 kilometers long and less than 1 kilometer wide. It was, in the words of one historian, the most insignificant island in the world. Finding this needle in a planetary haystack was a navigational challenge of immense proportions. The Electra was dangerously overloaded, filled with 1,100 gallons of fuel, every last drop needed for the estimated 18-hour flight. At dawn, Earhart and Noonan climbed into their cramped cockpit. The overloaded plane lumbered down the runway, struggling to get airborne. It finally lifted off, clearing the palm trees at the end of the runway with what one observer called an inch to spare. They were on their way, flying east into the rising sun and into history. Waiting for them at Howland Island was the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca. Its mission was to act as a radio beacon, guiding the Electra in for its final approach. The captain and crew of the Itasca knew the stakes were high. As the night wore on and the estimated time of arrival approached, they began to listen intently for Earhart's voice. The radio communications that followed are a transcript of a slow-motion tragedy, a dialogue of growing confusion and desperation separated by thousands of miles of static-filled ocean. Initially, the signals from the Electra were strong, but a critical misunderstanding in radio frequencies and communication schedules began to plague the attempt. The Itasca could hear Earhart's transmissions clearly, but she, for reasons that are still debated, apparently could not hear theirs. The crew of the Itasca sent out a constant stream of Morse code signals and voice transmissions, trying to guide her in, but received no indication she was receiving them. Earhart's voice, crackling through the ship's radio, began to betray a sense of concern. She reported cloudy and overcast weather, which would have made celestial navigation by the stars impossible for Noonan, leaving them to rely on dead reckoning. As the sun rose, she began asking the Itasca to take a bearing on her signal, but the transmissions were too short for the ship's direction-finding equipment to get a lock. The tension in the Itasca's radio room became unbearable. They could hear a lost and increasingly desperate pilot searching for them, but they were powerless to guide her in. At 7:42 a.m., her voice came through, strained but clear. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. But gas is running low. Have been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet." This confirmed their worst fears. She was close, but blind, and running out of time.
At 8:43 a.m., the Itasca received the final, famous, and haunting transmission believed to be from Amelia Earhart.
Her voice was frantic.
"We are on the line 157-337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait."
She was referring to a line of position, a navigational line that told her she was somewhere along a specific course relative to the sun.
The Itasca was also somewhere on that line. After a moment of silence, her voice came through again, weaker this time.
"We are running north and south."
And then, nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. The world's most famous aviator had vanished from the sky. The search that followed was the largest and most expensive air and sea search in American history at the time. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard immediately launched a massive operation involving 66 aircraft and 9 ships which scoured 250,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. They focused on the area around Howland Island, hoping to find any sign of the downed aircraft. They found nothing. Not a single piece of wreckage, not an oil slick, not a life raft. It was as if the Lockheed Electra and its 2-person crew had been erased from existence.
On July 19, 1937, the official search was called off, and Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were declared lost at sea.
This official conclusion forms the basis of the simplest and most widely accepted explanation, the crash and sink theory. In this scenario, due to a combination of overcast skies preventing celestial navigation, potential errors in their charts or calculations, and communication failures, Earhart and Noonan simply missed Howland Island. Low on fuel, they were forced to ditch the heavy, fuel-laden Electra in the open ocean. The plane would have sunk quickly in the deep waters of the Pacific, taking its crew with it, leaving no trace. It is a logical, plausible, and deeply unsatisfying conclusion to a legendary life. But for many, the story did not end there. The absolute lack of wreckage, combined with a series of tantalizing clues, has given rise to a compelling alternative theory, one that suggests Earhart and Noonan did not die in a crash but survived for a time as castaways. This is the Gardner Island hypothesis.
Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro, is a small uninhabited coral atoll located about 640 kilometers southeast of Howland Island.
Crucially, it lies directly on the 157 to 337 line of position that Earhart mentioned in her final transmission.
The theory, championed for decades by the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIGAR, suggests that when Earhart realized she had missed Howland, she turned south and flew along this navigational line, a standard procedure for pilots searching for a target. If she had done so, the first piece of land she would have encountered is Nikumaroro.
The evidence TIGAR has assembled is remarkable.
Dozens of credible post-loss radio signals were reported by amateur and professional radio operators across the Pacific and North America. These fragmented messages, often attributed to Earhart, suggested that the Electra was on land and that at least one of the crew was injured. The signals were sporadic, which would make sense if they were only able to power the radio when the tide was low enough to expose the plane's engines to be run. Then there is the archaeological evidence found on Nikumaroro itself. Expeditions to the island have uncovered what appears to be a castaway site. They found remnants of campfires containing bird and fish bones, clam shells that had been opened, and pieces of a 1930s-era woman's shoe, and a glass jar that was once a container for Dr. C.H. Barry's freckle ointment, a product Earhart was known to dislike, but was photographed with. Most significantly, in 1940, a British colonial officer discovered a partial human skeleton at the castaway site. A doctor at the time dismissed the bones as male, and they were subsequently lost. However, Teighar recovered the original British files, including the skeletal measurements. Modern forensic analysis of these measurements concluded that the remains were likely from a Caucasian female of Earhart's height and ethnic origin. Nearby, a sextant box was also found, similar to the type used by Fred Noonan. Furthermore, a piece of aluminum aircraft wreckage found on the island in 1991 has been identified by experts as a strong match to a custom repair patch that was installed on Earhart's Electra in Miami before her final flight. Together, these clues paint a tragic and compelling picture. Earhart and Noonan, unable to find Howland, land their damaged Electra on the reef of Nikumaroro. They survive for days, perhaps weeks, sending out desperate radio calls for help that are heard but not located. Eventually, they succumb to their injuries, thirst, or exposure, leaving behind a trail of tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive evidence of their final days. A third, more sinister theory persists, born from the tensions of the pre-war Pacific: the Japanese capture hypothesis. This theory alleges that Earhart's round-the-world flight was a cover for an American espionage mission. Proponents believe she was deliberately flying over Japanese-mandated islands in the Pacific, like Truk or the Marshall Islands, to photograph their military fortifications. In this scenario, she was either forced down or shot down by Japanese forces and taken prisoner. The story then splinters into various tales of her and Noonan being held captive, often on the island of Saipan, and eventually being executed as spies. This theory has been fueled for decades by anecdotal accounts from islanders who claim to have seen the white couple in captivity, and by a now debunked photograph that purported to show them on a dock in the Marshall Islands.
@channel, meaning, pause, question mark, sex, 0.05, question mark. Mainstream historians have found no credible, verifiable evidence to support the capture theory, and official government documents have consistently refuted it. So what really happened to Amelia Earhart? Did she and Fred Noonan meet a swift end in the cold, deep waters of the Pacific? Did they endure a slow, tragic end as castaways on a desert island? Or were they pawns in a deadly game of pre-war espionage? Each theory has its fervent believers and its frustrating lack of definitive proof. Amelia Earhart set out to conquer the world, and in a way, she succeeded. Her final act was not one of landing, but of vanishing into legend. She became a story, a puzzle, an icon of both heroic achievement and profound unsolved mystery. The woman who flew higher and farther than any other in her time left behind a final question mark so vast that it covers the entire Pacific Ocean. A question that continues to inspire explorers, investigators, and dreamers to keep searching for an answer.